Shrink the Nation is a podcast for thoughtful, informed adults, preferably with a pour in hand. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the hosts and guests only, and do not reflect the views of any employers, institutions, licensing boards, government agencies, bourbon distilleries, or family members, especially our family members. They've asked us to be very clear about that. This show is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing said here should be taken as medical, psychiatric, legal, or professional advice. If you're in crisis, call a professional. If you're mad at something we said, we suggest journaling or emailing us with civility. We're here to challenge ideas, not diagnose strangers. We're clinicians, not your clinicians. And we have the bourbon to prove it. Let's go. Propaganda isn't just posters from history class. It's the constant background noise that tells you who to fear, what to buy, and which side is obviously the real America. From Thomas Paine handing out viral pamphlets in 1776 to Uncle Sam pointing that finger, from daisy petals turning into mushroom clouds on TV to your social feed nudging outrage with every swipe, it's the same playbook dressed up in new clothes. What makes propaganda work is simple. It doesn't argue, it feels. It repeats until it sounds true, wraps itself in identity and duty, and makes you believe you came up with the idea on your own. That's why every generation thinks they're too smart to fall for it, while proving they're not. Welcome to Shrink the Nation, where tonight we're diagnosing 250 years of American persuasion, from pamphlets to push notifications and asking what it's done to our collective psyche. So pour a glass, settle in, and remember, if you think you can't be swayed by propaganda, congratulations. You already have. I'm David. Got my 20 plus years in the military. I'm drinking 4 roses tonight. Got a pretty stellar crew. I'm really excited to introduce. So let's start with Rob. Pass it on down.
Hey, it's Rob. 25 years in psychiatry, 30 years in the military. I am drinking Dunkin' Donuts coffee this morning because it is my morning and it's your guys' evening.
Trying to get Ben Affleck on one of these episodes.
That is the hope. That is the hope.
I'm Keith. About 25 years. Practicing psychiatry, psychotherapy, some addiction medicine. Don't have 20 years in the military. I can claim maybe 12 out of those. I'm looking at some aviation American gin. We'll see.
Ryan Reynolds. That's Ryan Reynolds'.
Is it? Well, he needs to come on too.
He's dreamy.
You can get Ryan Reynolds cut out. Right next year.
Ben
he may have sold the company, actually. I might take that back, but it was his for a while.
He needed the money for the phone company.
Well, it's back to the corn sweat poster, then. That's too bad.
Yeah, but I'm most excited about our guest.
Hi, I'm Allison. I am drinking a drink based on X-Files Season 9, Episode 4. I think it's Episode 4. A man who might be a dimension-jumping serial killer lives with his mother who demands a drink. Rob, this is a real drink on the show. It's Clamato with 2 squirts of Texas Pete and 2 ice cubes. Now, mine has Frank's Red Hot and low sodium D8 because I'm old. Also, a twist of lime. It's great.
Sounds lovely.
That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
I'd like to go to Allison's house and have her entertain.
I thought it was a Bloody Mary.
Yeah, it looked like a Bloody Mary. And you have
it's a common mistake.
Yeah.
That's the wrong episode. That's episode 8, season 6.
And there's celery in it too.
When Scully had a hangover, it was that episode.
Where she got the tattoo, the psychoactive tattoo?
If you say so. Yes.
Clearly, you've got more expertise here. Hey, super excited about the propaganda episode. I was thinking propaganda is a lot like bourbon. Stay with me. Everyone thinks they can handle it right up into that third heavy pour when they convince themselves that they're witty and clever enough to start a podcast people will actually want to listen to. Then they can't remember whose idea it was. So that's where we find ourselves right now at this moment.
The propaganda is a persuasive communication that prioritizes emotion and identity over evidence, often using repetition, fear, and group belonging to steer behavior.
I think propaganda is probably as old as human culture. There's a quote, big surprise.
Drink.
That propaganda is to democracy as violence is to dictatorships. And that was Noam Chomsky, one of my favorites from the 20th century. At any rate, I'm sure it goes back farther.
Propaganda is some sort of agenda, some sort of view of the world or a view of a certain topic of the world from a small group asking a larger group to come into that. If it picks up on the need for the individual to simplify very nuanced, complicated things and make it efficient, our survival instinct will say, yeah, I'm going to go for that.
Anytime you have a group of individuals who have some level of shared decision-making and you need to sway those individuals, propaganda became a thing. How do we frame a situation in the right way to get the outcome, to get the public support that we're looking for, that we want. It probably escalated in the 1900s, largely because of mass media. It opened up avenues that allowed access to a population, but it really extends back beyond that. Newspapers, probably, certainly late 1800s, we'll say. That's the driving force. How do you frame something in order to get the population to be on your side?
Let's kick this one off to Keith. Let's start with psychology, Keith. Walk us through that mental shortcuts that make us vulnerable to propaganda.
It's efficient, right? It's an incredibly efficient cognitive tool to take something complicated and make it simplified, which is really understandable to our human nature. We don't deal with anxiety. Our brain wants to push it out and we resist it. So if something helps us relieve the anxiety, we're going to accept the flattened out, more nullified version of it. Then that's good enough to get to the next step. But once we accept it, we have an investment, we have a sunk cost, and we are really averse to loss. Once we invest in something, we don't want to let go as an organism. It's just in all of us. We all do it.
Yeah, I keep doing this podcast.
It's a sunk cost.
The sunk cost fallacy.
When groups get large enough, they start to get unruly. I know when I was a kid, I had to read Lord of the Flies.
Oh, poor piggy.
The story starts out as a bunch of individuals struggling for survival, and then they end up forming groups. And then the groups get large enough that they have to come up with some sort of governance. But they accept some line of propaganda. If we want governance to go really well, there has to be a ton of energy put into it to sustain it. Otherwise, it devolves into infighting and the basic survival instinct. One of the things I really love about this podcast is I tend to think psychologically at the individual level, and I get challenged to think about how psychology extends to a social or a group level. It's really fascinating to look at how those two lines connect and are often really similar. At the end of the day, we're all individuals wrapped in an isolated cocoon. We pair up, we join groups, societies, nations. We experience ourselves in our Western American European culture as individuals. It would be interesting to have this discussion with someone from a different culture where they're more group-based. In our culture, we do have a high value from birth as individuals. We're biologically engineered for survival. The human brain is shown to not be a fan. Our brain is exceptionally good at taking in an incredible amount of data and flattening it out into a unifying theme that is simplified and then very easy for the consciousness to understand and respond to. We can appreciate how that would really help our survival. Can't spend a lot of time negotiating over options and obsessing over the finer points of things when it comes to our basic need to survive. And although we're a pretty fancy organism now with a fancy society, our society is way ahead of where our evolutionary biology is engineered to help us. And I think that's part of the root of the tree, really, that we're talking about.
Hey, it's Rob from Shrink the Nation. As my friend David so eloquently states at the beginning of the show, we are clinicians, but we're not your clinician. We love to joke around and dive into the tough topics, but there's something really important we need to say. If you're struggling with your mental health or facing substance use issues, we want you to know you're not alone. We have dedicated our professional careers to mental health, and we care deeply about it. It's okay to ask for help. Reaching out to a professional in your area could be the first step toward feeling better. Don't wait. There's support out there, and it works. Please take that first step. We want you to be well. Now let's get back to the show. Oh, and don't tell David I said he was eloquent. He'll be insufferable.
Three primary levers that get pulled usually when dealing with propaganda. You have the illusory truth effect, which is repetition, using repetition to get somebody to feel like something is true. Familiarity is not necessarily equal to accuracy. Fear and anger is used as accelerant. So moral shock stories, threat language can spike the sharing and compliance going with propaganda. And then identity and duty framing is another huge lever that gets pulled. All three of those are key aspects of propaganda that get utilized frequently.
All right, folks, show's over. David just solved it for us.
I didn't solve it for you. I gave you aspects of it.
We're done. We're done here. Allison, what are your thoughts?
One of the really interesting things is how we have this idea of propaganda and seeing if we take a look at our life around us to see how impactful it is. I know a lot of people who have lost their parents to propaganda, who cannot go against their identity that is then formed by that propaganda, and they're not willing to give it up. It's really difficult. So people lose contact with sometimes parents, sometimes estranged children.
All of us have been in primary school and junior high. We understand the effect of peer pressure. You can either join or you can be out. We are engineered such that being out is almost worse than death. So we can talk about individual cognitive dissonance or individual confirmation bias, but it's more powerful when we talk about it at a group or a societal level, where when we join groups to survive, that gets amplified exponentially. It's not linear. Our main drive is to survive. And when we join a group, we're much more powerful, much more able to survive.
There are bigger groups than a family. The next bigger group would be your community, and ways that we see propaganda play out there. People with what we now are calling vaccine hesitancy. And there was a headline that just came out today that shows kindergartners starting with school have fewer vaccination rates, and we have outbreaks of measles. And that's terrifying because it's deadly to children. But we have people so terrified of vaccine injury that they would rather have a child be very sick or die than get a vaccine. So we have so many ways that propaganda impacts our daily life.
Using that, so which lever do you think is getting pulled specifically for that particular style of propaganda?
For vaccines, I think it's absolutely identity. Once you get your core group of parenting friends who then have this idea that you can get autism debunked, vaccines don't cause autism.
Let me take a step back, because I think this actually is making the point about propaganda. So propaganda gets you in your feels, as my kids would say. And anyone who's been a parent knows the anxiety of the vaccine experience. So the vaccine experience is you've got to take this baby who's now become your responsibility, and you love them with all your heart, and you want to protect them, and you would die for them, and you would kill for them. But then you have to take them into a clinic and have needles jabbed into their little legs and their little arms. And it is, from a personal experience, it is an incredibly anxiety-provoking experience, watching your child be exposed to discomfort. And what happens with propaganda in this is it ends up playing upon a baseline anxiety, creating a narrative that creates a feeling that is what you want to believe to begin with. You want to believe that, and it alleviates a certain anxiety, and then it takes on a life of its own. So, I don't think any parent avoids a vaccine on the basis of making a choice between watching their child be very, very sick or allowing their child to live. They make that choice based on a short-term anxiety about exposing a child to something that they feel is an unknown that also has a short-term discomfort, and that discomfort is experienced by the parent. That's the gist of this, is that propaganda gets us at our feelings, and it tells us the truth that we want to believe. And it's not necessarily the truth, but it is the truth we want to believe. Yeah. And it's applicable in so many ways. I mean, we see it in advertising, we see it in politics, we see it in Facebook memes and TikTok. And in fact, it's escalated because of social media. We have outsourced the propaganda. The propaganda is my Aunt Cindy now, what she posts on Facebook.
You touched on a core topic. We have two brains. We have a very ancient brain, and we still have it. And that is a fear-flight-based response brain. And that keeps us alive. Emotional-based. We also have evolved this really fancy prefrontal lobe cortex that allows us to inhibit and to make executive decisions. Those two things are always at odds. And the four of us have always been taught that the basic function of our prefrontal cortex is to tell the rest of our brain, don't do that. Wait a hot second. With what Allison brought up, I'd like to explore why many reasonable, good people today make good faith decisions not to vaccinate their kids. When I was raised, vaccines were without question. And David, you can say we can drink. The zeitgeist that we grew up in was we accepted the scientific notions. We trusted that, and that was soothing to us. It reduced our cognitive dissonance and our anxiety. I don't believe any of my parents or my friends' parents cared much about science or looked at the studies. They accepted that that was the thing to do. I'd be really interested to have a discussion about why smart, good, well-meaning people are doing something today that they weren't doing otherwise from a psychological perspective, because people aren't deranged or crazy or bad. They're doing what they think based on their biology and their evolution and the effects of their society. They're doing what they think is in the best interest of their kids.
Yeah. And I've actually got some thoughts on that. Surprise, Rob's got thoughts. It's lived history. When we were kids, our parents had experienced what polio, measles, mumps look like. They had experienced that. They saw their peers, family members get very, very sick and maybe even die or become paralyzed. They saw this and they felt it. And what you were smacking at, there's an author named Daniel Kahneman, and Daniel Kahneman talks about the fast emotional thinking and slow rational thinking.
Yeah, I was trying to keep away from that book, but you brought it right in. Yeah.
Well, you know, me and books. Me and books have a special relationship that borders on pathologic.
Yeah, it's a problem. But there's a near threat and a far threat. I think that's
Yes. And when we were kids, our parents, and maybe more to the point, our parents who were largely guiding and providing input and setting the zeitgeist, go ahead and drink.
Doesn't count if you do it.
Yeah, it doesn't.
They had a lived experience which altered their fast emotional thinking. Their thinking was, well, hell yeah, of course you're going to do the vaccine because my brother died of measles, or my niece had polio and ended up paralyzed in an iron lung. And we now have had a 50-year period in which we have been so separated from those illnesses that our fast emotional thinking, which drives us most of the time, unless we're being very thoughtful, drives us most of the time is, I don't want my kid to go through that. I don't know what they're putting in my child. Truth doesn't matter. What matters is feeling. And that's the power of propaganda.
The four of us would say vaccines are the biggest scientific advantage humankind's ever had. But we've had an incredible amount of dogmatic education that's been drilled into us, and we see the impacts of illness, but we're a rare bunch in terms of numbers and percentages. The threat of measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, diphtheria. I mean, it makes sense from a human biological evolutionary perspective. If I simply don't see the threat, it would take a huge cognitive leap for a lot of folks to be like, oh, okay, I'll believe this body of science based on stuff that I don't have the time to learn. And people I trust are telling me it could be a threat, and I don't see the upside. So why do it? Makes sense.
I also think that your podcast has talked about the death of empathy, or the lack of empathy across the nation as a whole, that empathy is now more and more being seen as a weakness. I do think that what used to drive people to be vaccinated was a group effort. We're all going to knock out polio. We're all going to get sprayed with that mosquito spray that they drove down the streets, fumigating whole towns. We're in this together. We don't have that anymore. And that togetherness is very often reviled in propaganda for being weak and kind of almost disgusting. So we don't have that urge to band together to fight this common enemy anymore.
Talking about identity.
When we say propaganda, my temptation is to make it a negative propaganda. Truthfully told, there is some outcomes that are positive propaganda. And I'm sure initially when they were initiating vaccine programs, there was a great deal of propaganda to get people on board with that.
Yeah, I would push back on you, Rob, and say propaganda isn't good or bad.
No.
It's human nature. As a nation, we laud the propaganda of World War II. A lot of people collect and like those posters. We all think it's quite American, and we don't have any concerns with it. But that's propaganda. It's not good. It's not bad. It's a very natural human impulse. And I'm sure all four of us are equally culpable in joining and encouraging propaganda that we align to. It's just the human nature.
Absolutely.
We call it science communication when it's a propaganda for things that we
For us.
believe that for
Right.
us, for science.
I'm trying to
Propaganda,
convey-
it's in the eye of the beholder. The side that you're on, if it's your propaganda, it's good propaganda. Propaganda does not require truth.
That's a good point.
No,
Propaganda is going after the feelings,
absolutely.
pulling at those specific levers to get people to go along with a particular viewpoint, regardless of truth. Now, whether you view that as positive or negative that depends on what side of the argument you're on, because I'm sure there are plenty of people who do not believe that Anti-vax is a bad thing, so they don't think of it as negative.
Indeed. Here's a great story about propaganda. One of my favorites, actually. I keep coming back to this over my career. So early on in my career, I think I was a resident, actually, and I'm seeing patients in an outpatient clinic, and a woman comes in and hands me a magazine. And this is in the days where magazines still existed. So this is paper magazine. And she said, "I want this." And it was this 2-page middle of the magazine ad of this beautiful athletic woman leaping through a wheat field with a beautiful sun behind her. She looked like the picture of health, the picture of vitality and femininity. And this woman who comes to me, hands it to me and says, "I want this." And it was a medicine ad. And my next question was, okay, do you have herpes? It was a Valtrex ad. She had no idea that it was of the medicine for herpes. She had no idea what that was. What she identified with, what the propaganda got at with her, was this image of vitality and health, etc. And it had slid into her feelings. Very similar to sliding into David's DMs. Please do that. Slide into David's DMs. He loves it. It makes him feel good. But doesn't matter what you say. Truth is irrelevant. It makes him feel good. But that's what she wanted. She wanted to feel those things, and that's what was most important. And it is one of the more relevant examples of propaganda that I can think of in my life.
Yeah, and a good example of the importance of governance, that when I was youngest, there was a law that there would be no advertisements for pharmaceuticals in mass media. Not commercials, not magazines. And that's a choice. That's a group choice that individuals come together psychologically and make a choice to say no to that propaganda. They say, we don't want the influence of that propaganda. That's profit-based. We can make a choice to say no. We can then allow that to come in. In my lifetime, I've seen the change. All of us probably get medical journals in the mail, and half of it's full of ads. It has an effect, good, bad, and different. Has an effect. And psychologically, I would argue, all those choices tend to be made in near term to reduce near-term anxiety.
Humans prefer certainty over accuracy.
Yes, they do. The whole discipline of the scientific approach is to put that on the ice tray, to take our need for immediate gratification and relief of anxiety and say, well, there's this process that you're trained to follow. And in the end, it will bring better results. You just have to hang in there with it. But that goes against human nature. Very few would want to do it. It's understandable why, without the impulse of incredible societal pressure to say, no, this is valuable. We want to hear what these people have to say. It's more human nature to say, I would rather not. I think we can figure this out in the near term.
Pull this back out, since focus of what we do is we look at the individual psychodynamics and then extrapolate that out to the nation. Let's talk about national propaganda. It doesn't have to be right now, although at any given moment in time, there's a body of propaganda.
You could look at the early forming of the United States of America and say the Bill of Rights and the coming together of the founding mothers and fathers was propaganda in its own way. Propaganda could be neutral. At some point, it had to develop a governance if it was going to be effective and helpful to balance the aspects of human nature, of individual survival, and to push back on this sense of a zero-sum game, where if I lose, that means Rob or David wins, and vice versa. Where some folks were enlightened enough to say, no. We all can thrive together, but we need some level of governance to do that.
One of the reasons I was interested in this topic was really the impact of social media on propaganda, that historically it required a budget. And in order to get to the masses, at least, it required a budget. It required a campaign, a think tank that developed these campaigns and then projected them out into the population via traditional media means. And now it's different.
The printing press was a very important innovation. That was a huge deal. And eventually we got to the Bill of Rights. I think we could make a direct line to social media to that. You could argue that those that had the means of control of communication back then influenced the masses with pamphlets. Pamphlets sound, old-timey and kitschy, but back then they were something. People succeeded in saying these Bill of Rights is something we all want to align around, and we don't generally question that as a society. I mean, there's some discussion now of, maybe we are questioning it, but when it came to being, the people that had means, the people that had wealth, and were able to produce the first ever mass media and deliver that to the masses, perhaps they won the day. Is that all that different from what's happening today?
Yes,
Yes.
but no. Yes and no. So it is different. There is a difference. The one difference is that when the printing press became to be, the ability to spread propaganda exponentially rose. Prior to that, in order to spread propaganda, it was usually person to person. If you go back to Octavian, eventually Augustus, and Mark Antony, there was quite a bit of propaganda that was put forth to try to take power from Mark Antony after Julius Caesar was assassinated. In order to spread that propaganda, they had to do by horseback. On a particularly good day, they could travel about 100 miles person to person. Getting to the point of a printing press, all of a sudden, now you have examples of propaganda that would explode to the thousands of people in very short periods of time. To Rob's point, that was still very much controlled by people with power. That was something that was very, very intentional, very specific, had a lot of resources put into it to dictate it. Now, however, propaganda can arise anywhere. The misinformation can just show up from a meme. It can spread. If you use WhatsApp as an example, in a group with 256 people, you can share that 20 times. That's 5,000 people. Those 5,000 people can share it 20 times. You have 5.2 million people who can then have access to that information within seconds.
That's impressive math.
And that doesn't have to be intentional. It doesn't have to be an agenda. There can be almost no resources put into it. It just has to be somebody saying something that is not real, but feels correct. And that can have quite devastating effects.
I am seeing a lot of facial expressions from Allison. That might just be a natural.
This is just what my face looks like.
I thought you had a big thought. Wow us.
No.
Big
Wow.
feels. Big feelings.
Did
No,
David's propaganda have an impact on you?
Yes. I mean, this was such a deep cut coming from David. I was expecting references from Mark Antony on the Via Appia or whatever from you, Rob, and not from David. I'm just delighted.
Yeah,
Is that
was
did I get the right country?
You got the right nation state, maybe. David's got just a deep love for ancient Roman history.
He likes togas. It's
yeah,
togas.
I like to wear them. Yes, I do wear them frequently.
David's wearing a toga right now.
Or just a sheet.
You all did follow the cultural discussion of like men, these are broad stereotypes. Men are obsessed or like really interested in the Roman Empire and like what's the like female equivalent of the Roman Empire. And it's like a bunch of short form videos of like women being like, did you know? And it's just their little thing that they're super into.
What is it? What is the thing?
It's different forever.
It's the Kardashians.
No, it is not the Kardashians,
It's the
David,
Kardashians.
unless it is the Kardashians.
For some people, it's the Kardashians.
For
Why?
some people.
Women are just that much more complex than men. Men just we like the Roman Empire. Women like other stuff. Is that not right?
I don't know. Pulling this back to our nation at this moment from the Roman Empire.
Well, no, David made a good. I don't know if it was good or bad. David makes a lot of points, but David made a point that got my attention.
It sparked something.
If he did that amazingly fast math in his head that he didn't practice before the podcast of if all of us, I would argue, are, 5th, 6th graders at heart. Most of us don't much move from that emotional state. Our brains and our cognitive stuff goes, and we kind of trick ourselves that we're fancier and more developed. But we sort of stay there. We want to be part of the group. We don't want to be rejected. We want to be accepted. We want to be lauded. We want to be praised. If I get many inputs of messages, and, David, you making the point of exponentially all these messages could come in, giving me the same kind of stimulus over and over of think this, think that, or this is good, this is bad. Biologically, psychologically, there's almost no way to overcome that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to succumb to it. You have to accept it or reject it. The path goes two ways. You reject it or you accept it at some point. And I think you make a really good point, David, that the technology has changed where that is a little overwhelming. Maybe I'm being mild. That is overwhelming at this point, where we get those all the time. And our nature is prone to absorb those and have to respond to those and almost make a decision. It's sort of a natural to see the input and say, I don't care. I have no feeling about that. We're engineered to say, I have a feeling yes or no to that, good or bad. We're not robots where we can say, neutral, no feeling about that. We have to take one side or the other. And that's where propaganda has its power. It knows you have to take a choice.
I guess my concern about social media is that there's a quote from Goebbels, the propaganda minister for Germany, World War II, that said, a lie told once is a lie. A lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. And what we've achieved is through mass media and through social media is that lie can be told 1,000 times within minutes. It can spread across the internet. And I know with my kids, they come to me with the most outrageous, quote unquote, truths that they truly believe at this point, not because it's true, not because there's any science behind it, not because there's a reality that backs it up, but because they've just heard it on TikTok 10 different times from 10 different TikTok people. And we run into this phenomenon with the internet, this false sense that we're deferring to expertise, to authority, because, it's got to be true if it's on the internet. One of my favorite quotes, absolute favorite quotes, is that don't believe everything you see on the internet. Abraham Lincoln said that. Between that deference to authority, it is on some platform in which I am observing that this people must have some knowledge that I don't have. Plus, repetition ends up making a falsehood a truth, particularly if it plays into something that the kids believe in. So a good example of this is that my kids will come to me and say, I think I have this kind of ADHD. Now, it's a ridiculous kind that doesn't actually exist, but, like one of them came to me and was like, I don't like to work out. And that's a type of ADHD.
Well, if you send them to me, I'm happy to treat them.
Sure, I'm sure you will. Here's some Concerta. But they truly believe it because it gets them in their feels. It makes them feel okay about, it's not that I'm not doing things that I need to do, that I should do, that are uncomfortable, so I avoid. It's, I have this condition and that makes it okay. So they feel better about it. And that's just an example of propaganda. But we can also look at the nation as a whole and look at all these examples where there are mistruths, very straightforward mistruths that are demonstrable. If you take 2 seconds to fact check, they are demonstrable, but they're said so many times that it becomes truth.
You're describing the illusory truth effect. And what happens is when you hear something enough times, because of the way that our brain stores memories, eventually it does become true to us. As we try to pull memories back up, the information that we hear, even if we know it not to be true, it's still planted there. And so as we go back and try to retrieve that information, if we've heard it and we've heard it over and over and over again, it does become true to us. That's just one of the key levers of propaganda, is to say it over and over again, make it true by saying it.
That when you are working with somebody who's coming to terms with finding out the thing they thought was true is not true, it's heartbreaking. On a clinical level, sometimes that somebody did not get a diagnosis, and there are so many identity pieces connected with that. And then when they get the official report that no, the heartbreak is like, that was part of my identity, and now I don't have that. What does that mean? Who am I now? And you can see them grapple with that. And I think that is on a bigger scale too. You can see somebody when they learn something isn't quite true, they had it wrong, that you can see them hold it in their mind sometimes just for a little bit, and then they let it go and they revert back to their previous mistaken or misinformed idea. It's so difficult to hold on to that painful truth that then sometimes it just slips away and you can't do it.
And that plays in exactly what Keith was saying earlier, that sunk cost fallacy. Once you've invested, once that you have acquired something that has organized the chaos of your life and explained it in a way that you feel good about, or at least you are more comfortable with, that you will reject reality for an indefinite amount of time. And then there's also that element that when you buy into the propaganda, you become part of the group and you don't want to leave the group. And maybe you've sent out the propaganda. Changing your mind means contradicting yourself. There's hesitance to that. One of the things I love about propaganda in general, advertising. Hey, as a quick quiz to you guys, who is the father of modern advertising?
Don Draper.
Don Draper.
Is it?
No.
I watched
It is
the whole
not.
documentary
It's
about
not
that
John
guy.
Hamm.
No, it is not. And it is very much tied to our line of work, by the way.
So it's not Thomas Paine?
It is not. This is modern advertising for products. He advertised everything from bacon to dynamite. And his name was Edward Bernays, and he is Freud's nephew. Freud's nephew is considered the father of modern advertising.
Let's talk about World War II propaganda poster. When we look at those, so we talked
Keith
about.
was totally untouched by that, by the way. Everybody, go ahead.
It's good. It's good trivia, and I'm sure there was a father before that father and a mother before that mother. When we talk about personal psychology and propaganda, let's all think about what colors do we use, right? If you want to think about psychology in a cognitive psychology perspective, more from a pure psychological background, right? We look at how the brain reacts. What colors do we respond to? What colors are the posters of propaganda? Think about World War II.
Red, white, and blue, brother.
When you want to put forward a message, we tend to use primary colors, big, bold, big font, big words, very simple words. Simple in the sense of one word says a lot. And you see that through, you can go to any culture and you would see the very same thing. You would see primary cultures, big, bold splashes, big images, large words that capture huge nuances in one simple concept, and people want to rally around it. So if you look at World War II, I wasn't alive then, of course. I mean, you were.
Robbie
alive,
was.
but
I was in short pants.
70 or something.
I was in short pants.
That was an existential time, right? And the messages were very basic and simple. And so I want to push back a bit and say, there is some survival instinct and adaptive understandability to propaganda. I'm not saying it's bad. I don't think it's bad. It helps us survive. And in times of crisis, we rally around it and nobody really questions it. But there's a huge risk there. It serves a purpose at a time. And if you're living in a very basic hand-to-mouth society, maybe it always works and it's adaptive. But in the very complicated global network of society that we live in, it is not as adaptive. And I think it is more divisive and dividing than it is unifying. And if we want to do well as a group, and we're globally grouped, like it or not, we are, it is not as adaptive to navigate and to adhere to and be drawn to more simplified versions of propaganda-like messages, no matter where they come from, no matter what position or view they come from.
The nuance of the world is overwhelming. And I would think, I'm thinking of James Carville, the Democratic strategist. I think he would own propaganda. He would say, yeah, this is propaganda. Now, he would argue that his propaganda is for the greater good. In order to be in power, you have to have the propaganda that gets you in power, and then you do good things with it. The good-bad valence is going to be something that we judge in the rear view by history, that this result in something good. So, like German propaganda, World War II was very, very effective for the German people.
So James Carville, sure, take that point, but he also makes the assumption that there is a good governance in place to keep it safe.
He does.
Right? To keep guardrails on that.
He does.
Or he would say, he would say, fuck you, because that's how he talks.
Yeah.
He would say, fuck you. No, if there's not good guardrails in place, we use it to fight back. Propaganda can be helpful if all society is aligned around a common goal.
Absolutely. I concur with that entirely.
Yeah.
But we would be very sad if we didn't talk about the most interesting propaganda, which is conspiracy theories. We got to talk about conspiracy theories, and
yes,
we have to a little bit. Rob was
Allison,
going
which
down
conspiracy theory are you currently buying into?
Okay. I'm so excited about the Denver International Airport lizards living under. Did you know that the Denver International Airport is one of the largest by square mile footage, whatever, and is this huge complex? And there are lizard people that live in the bottom of it. And when they were doing renovations a few years ago, they had posters up with lizards in it saying they have to make room for the lizard people. Forward a link to the Denver International Airport for a time did have reference to the lizards on their official website. It's
right.
true.
Well, having flown into Denver multiple times, I've shared an aisle with someone who looked very much like a lizard. So yeah, I'm behind that 100%. 100%.
I have a patio in my backyard. Many lizards live under that. So I'm on board.
Yeah, sounds legit.
It sounds legit. Well, okay, conspiracy theories. QAnon, they were masterful with their propaganda. Where goes one, goes all. That is a master class in a slogan that captured a population that was drawn to that for the group identity. I am not only buying into this, I am part of the group. I am part of something bigger than me. I am in the small population that is in the know, and I have a group behind me. Where goes one, goes all. Now, if I make this choice, everyone's with me. So that is a spectacular example of propaganda, completely not based in any kind of reality, but it caught people in an emotional place who felt isolated, felt alone, felt confused, and gave them a sense of identity, gave them a sense of group ownership, and is just beautifully simple. Just so simplistic and perfect from a propaganda standpoint.
Yeah, I'm attracted to it. It's attractive.
There will be a group of people who are to the left, right, and behind me.
We're a fascinating species. We're individuals meant to survive individually, and we're incredibly driven to do that. But the only way we can do it, this is sort of a paradox, is to join up in groups. That's how we survive. We can't take on anything out there in the natural world individually, no matter what we see on
Naked and Afraid.
Yeah, I mean, whatever Nat Geo show we watch. And if you watch those, they don't do that well. Maybe they got 60 days till they tap out. We're meant only to survive in groups and with some level of technology. If we look at the basic individual human psychology of you give me a lot of inputting data, I've got to make a quick decision to simplify that into one or two basic concepts and decisions, and then I have to organize myself around those. I'm going to do that with existential grief and anxiety. I'm going to do it as if my life depends on it, because that's what my biology tells me I have to do. And I don't have a lot of time to look at a whole bunch of things and analyze over it. I have to pick one. And then once we join that group, it's almost biologically near impossible for that person then to leave that group. You have to deal with not just the psychological sense of rejection and cognitive dissonance of I was wrong, but also there's something that we don't talk about a lot. We like to see ourselves as like above biology, but this concept of I can't survive outside of it. It's important for us to keep in mind as we talk that this is not just about individual lessening of anxiety, but also it taps into our nature as organisms to survive.
I wanted to point out, because I think this does tie something together, propaganda can be effective, whether that's positive or negative. It's kind of in the eye of the beholder. Conspiracy theories, there is a bit of a difference. If we go to a book, there is a book.
What? You read a book?
I read
No
a book.
way.
Foolproof by Sander van den Linden. He actually has a great little acronym that you can use to identify if propaganda is risen to level of conspiracy. And it's conspire. It's super easy, right? CONSPIR.
Irony.
Yeah. So the C would be there. For the propaganda, there has to be some kind of conspiracy within it. That's the C. The speed of the propaganda comes from offering a ready-made hidden truth. Overriding suspicion is the O. So the propaganda whispers don't trust the official story. There's nefarious intent. That's the N, which that paints a villain with clear motives, which always makes it really juicy and easy to repeat. The S is that something must be wrong. So a half-baked lie feels emotionally satisfying. A complicated truth feels like homework. So guess which one's going to go viral? A persecuted victim is the P. And so lies will usually position you as the underdog against a big machine. And that's playing into the identity role. The I is immune to evidence. So generally, once people share the viral falsehood, they really dig in, even if they start to hear the truth. And interestingly, they often will believe conspiracies that are contradictory to their own conspiracies. An example would be that the COVID virus came out of a lab in China with the goal of killing everyone, but also that everyone already had it and it was being activated by masks. Those were two common conspiracies that people simultaneously believed. They're very contradictory. And then R would be reinterpreting randomness. So propaganda does have the tendency to give randomness meaning. This event was no accident. And humans like to cling to meaning like life raft. So that's just a really good example where this sort of ties into what you guys have already spoken about, was that propaganda races ahead because it speaks to all those things. It offers the conspiracies, it offers the suspicion, villains, and a victim in one easy dose. Truth shows up a lot later because it demands that patient, the context, evidence, and three things people really rarely want when they're scrolling. So you're speaking about that fast reaction versus that slower reaction conspiracies really tack on. It would be really difficult to say that there's a lot of positive comes from conspiracy theories, unfortunately.
Yeah, but that speaks to the larger issue of governance and how do we use these tools at a social, psychological level for good or societal agreement versus divisiveness, where, in the army, it's adaptive. Right? Like people that have been to a war zone, they don't have the choice to say that's a person probably has a kid or maybe they are a good person. It's very important in that moment to see the enemy as bad. It's helpful. It's adaptive. It's a harsh reality, but it's true. But if we lever those things to things that are less acute, less severe, less emergent, then they can be more destructive.
Mm-hmm.
I would also argue that that's pretty destructive for the person on the other end of the United States Army or whatever.
Well, implied, or the implication is that we're on the side of good always. Come on, Allison. Are you implying the United States Army would engage in something that is not morally correct?
Well, I made some notes about this police action called Vietnam. I don't know if you've heard of it, but that's
another
the
good
country.
It's another good example of propaganda. So at that moment in time, we had the domino effect. I mean, it was a very simplistic way to portray the world that if the communists got a hold someplace, the dominoes would start to fall. And there was a great deal of support behind it. But inside the army, we use propaganda all the time. I probably say it every day of my life when I'm trying to get soldiers to be motivated and understand the greater good. One team, one fight. We say that all the time, that this isn't an individual sport. This is a group effort, and we use it, and it's simple. It's a simple little statement that carries a ton of meaning, and that's the nature of propaganda.
I would say I'm glad for it at times, right? For the soothing effect on those that have to do the hard thing that they didn't really have a choice to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
No matter what the side is.
Having been there and experienced it and knowing the individual fear that's associated with going outside the wire, making those trips, knowing you are individually in danger, life, limb, significant pain, that it is incredibly reassuring to think of my role in the team, in the greater good, the bigger picture, than think on the level of the individual who just wants to get home.
Or like, what are the actual ramifications of my being part of this much bigger thing that is doing this much bigger political move for perhaps reasons that you might not agree with?
The nuances of that are beyond what you can comprehend when you're there trying to stay alive. Yeah. David, deep breath, prescriptions. I do have a plug right now. Everybody go to our website, because now Shrink the Nation has 30% more freedom.
And I've enjoyed it.
There you go.
Go to the website, shrinkthenation.com, sign up for our newsletter. There is a contact form, 30% more freedom.
You got a question? All right. So here's a question. This is from Facebook, and it's from John L. And it starts with, I am curious, how do you take into account the people in power who can only function in chaos?
Chaos is an easier place to function for many leaders. When you are in chaos, you're not being held to a standard to actually accomplish much other than giving some sense of understanding to the chaos or some focus to the chaos. And also, when you're in chaos, you can look or you can blame an outside force. There is an outside force causing this chaos. It is not my fault. I am going to stand here and fix this, but you're really not held accountable to that because it's someone else's fault and it's probably outside of your control. So leadership in chaos, or those who are drawn to leadership in chaos, rarely accomplish much. I hold folks who can be a leader in normalcy. I appreciate them much more. Because in normalcy, then we have to deal with the nuance of life and of individuals and the daily variations there. But in chaos, everyone has a shared enemy.
All right. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I covered it.
You did a nice job.
I did.
All right.
I did. Hey, Shrink the Nation, now with 30% more freedom.
30% more freedom. And don't forget the Test of Rage Max. Now we can get into prescriptions.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So I want everyone to watch C-SPAN. I think if you watch C-SPAN, you're going to be placed in the face of reality versus the propaganda. And the reality is so much more nuanced, so much more boring, so much more like work a day. What's the old term? Dog's body. It's just effort. It's just work. When we compare it to the TikTok dance that tells us what to believe, I think that has a positive effect. I also want everyone to read 1984. George Orwell. Orwell said, all propaganda are lies, even when it's the truth, because he was referencing basically that you're taking the truth and still reframing it in the way you want to frame it. But 1984 is a spectacular example of a society that has become ruled by propaganda. So read 1984. I would highly suggest reading it with a really stiff drink.
I'll jump in on the backside of that. I'd say read Goebbels' Overcoat, and I would leave it at that.
Say that one more time, because I'm writing it down.
Gogol, The Overcoat.
Okay.
If you have to do anything, C-SPAN's not a bad idea. It's boring though, but be patient with people that have different views than you and listen to them. You don't have to accept them. But if it's somebody that you accept and you listen to their views, then that creates a level of dissonance. And if you can sit with it, then you have a choice to make. And that may make you more open-minded. And we all need more open-mindedness.
Let's see. So my prescription is a little more mid-brow. I don't think it's mid. Rob, that's a youth terminology for something that's not very good. There's a really great podcast called...
Back in the 30s, we said bangin'.
There's a really great podcast that is bangin', called Things Fell Apart. It's by John Ronson. I think he's like a Welsh journalist, and he has 2 seasons of just long interviews to get to the bottom of a certain topic. So as, I guess, clinicians, one of the best ones is season 2. It's about excited delirium. So he covers all kinds of like cultural firestorms. So he covers abortion, he covers Pizzagate, covers satanic panic. And it's really interesting because he does it with such kindness, compassion, and curiosity. It's a wonderful model of how to talk to someone who holds much different beliefs than you. And he does it with such compassion that it's really wonderful.
He wrote a book called The Psychopathy Test that was pretty apologetic to psychopaths, but still a good book. Okay, so hopefully it's been conveyed throughout the rest of our episode that nobody is immune to propaganda. It's not always necessarily a bad thing, but nobody's immune to it. So my prescription would be, before you decide to share something on social media, open a couple of outside sources. Look for different versions of that and see if what you're about to share is real. See if it's made up or not. At least 2. And if you feel angry as you're about to share it, maybe find at least 3 different sources where you start throwing that out into the world for everyone else to lose out on.
David, I love your prescription.
Yeah, I do too. Snopes.com is a great place to start, and give your brain a chance to move from fast emotional thinking to slow rational thinking.
Yes. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end. Thank you to everyone who stuck around to listen. Thank you to our guest,
Tens of listeners.
Allison. Thank you so much for showing up. We really appreciate it. We love the contribution. Hopefully we'll get you back.
Wait, when do I get to read my list of complaints?
That's a different episode.
She's ready to share. Not yet. No, I will cut you off. Our email is socials@shrinkthenation.com, or slide into our DMs. Please smash that subscribe. We are on all the socials. Follow us, like us, do whatever the different social media platform wants from you, and we'll ask us questions, and we will take care of that. All right. Well, that was it. We're going to close it out.
Music.
Play the music. Cue it up. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.
I love that music.